They were gone. Every tent was open, the campfire still crackling, food half-eaten on the plates, and not a single person in sight. When we arrived, the warmth still hung in the air like the ghost of laughter. Boots were lined neatly outside the tents. A radio was playing soft static, as if waiting for someone to return and change the channel. No signs of struggle, no notes, no trails, just stillness. It was the kind of quiet that doesn't come naturally in the woods, the kind that clings to your skin and makes your breath feel loud. We had hiked up to Ridge Loop to meet our friends, 4 of them to be exact. We were late by maybe an hour. They had promised us hot food and stories by the fire. Instead, we found their world paused in mid-sentence. I remember feeling instantly cold, even though the fire still danced and licked at the wood. The tents hadn't been zipped shut. One of the mugs was still steaming. I touched it. It burned my fingers. Whatever had happened, it had happened minutes ago. Mira, my girlfriend, called out their names. No answer. The trail behind us was empty, the path ahead winding deeper into a forest that seemed to lean in closer with every second. I checked my phone. No signal. Expected. We were deep enough in the mountains to be off-grid, but this felt different, like we were unplugged from something larger than a network. I walked over to Nate's tent. He's the kind of guy who packs with military precision. His gear was all there. Backpack, sleeping roll, GPS tracker, even his lucky carabiner. Nothing stolen, nothing disturbed. His boots, though, they were muddy. Fresh, as if he had just come back from somewhere. Then I noticed the chairs around the fire. 4 of them, pushed back like someone had stood up in a hurry. The marshmallows were still on the stick, half melted. Mira stepped closer to the fire and whispered, "They just vanished." And that's when I saw it, on the tree, just outside the glow of the firelight. A mark, like something had been carved deep into the bark. I walked closer and ran my hand over it. Wasn't just carved, it was burned. A perfect circle, maybe 5 inches wide, with a vertical line slashed through the center. It felt old and wrong, ancient in a way the forest shouldn't have remembered. Mira called me over to one of the tents, Kelsey's. The flap was still open. Inside, her journal lay on top of a folded sleeping bag. Mira flipped through it quickly. Most of it was what you'd expect. Sketches, notes about the hike, funny quotes. But the last entry, we both stared at it. The handwriting was rushed, smeared in places like she was writing fast, or crying. Something's off. We heard bells in the woods last night. No one else did, but I know I heard them. Nate says I'm imagining things, but I saw lights too. Not fireflies, not headlamps, just lights. Flickering, too high in the trees. We'll leave in the morning if they come back. Mira's hand was shaking. She closed the journal and looked at me. They didn't leave this morning. The woods around us felt different now, like they were listening. I tried to shake it off. Maybe they'd gone for a walk. Maybe they followed an animal. But the uneaten dinner, the hot mug, the journal, none of it added up. I shouted again. Nothing but the echo of my voice bouncing off the trees. We had to decide. Stay and wait, or go back down for help. We stayed. That night, as the fire dimmed, we thought we heard something. Bells. Far away. Or maybe wind. Maybe not. Mira barely slept. Every crackle from the fire made her flinch. I stayed up most of the night, keeping watch, telling myself there was a rational explanation. There had to be. People don't just vanish. Not like that. At around 3 a.m., the woods went completely silent. No insects, no breeze, not even the whisper of leaves shifting above us. Just the fire spitting tiny sparks and Mira's shallow breathing. Then the bells returned. Software delicate, like tiny wind chimes. but they weren't coming from one direction. They were everywhere, like the sound was stitched into the fabric of the forest. I stood, slowly, flashlight in hand. Mira sat up, wide-eyed, mouth trembling. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. I nodded. My throat was dry. The light from the flashlight hit nothing unusual, but the beam felt weak, like the dark was swallowing it whole. I scanned the trees, the path, the tents. No movement. But I had the unmistakable sense we were being watched. You know that crawling sensation on your skin, like ants under your shirt? That. Mira grabbed my arm and pointed. That mark. On the other tree. I turned the flashlight. Another symbol. Same circle. Same vertical slash. Burned into the bark 20 feet from the first. It hadn't been there yesterday. I wanted to leave. Everything in me screamed to run. But we had no signal. No vehicle. The hike back would take hours in daylight, and in the dark, it could be lethal. So we waited, eyes on the fire, listening to bells that had no source. Morning came slowly, like a bruise spreading across the sky. The sounds faded with the light. The birds came back, chirping like nothing had happened. We decided to pack up. The other group was gone. That much was clear. We'd head back, alert the rangers, do something other than sit in that ghost camp. As we gathered our gear, Mira walked toward the stream to refill our water bottles. She froze halfway and called out my name, her voice tight and uncertain. I rushed to her side. There, in the muddy bank by the water, were footprints. Not boots, bare feet. Dozens of them. Some small, like a child's. Some much larger. All of them leading away from the camp, and then circling back. But the mud was fresh. They hadn't been there yesterday. These were new. Made overnight. We followed them carefully, past the trees, past the final line of tents, until they stopped. Just stopped. Right in the clearing. No more trail, no sign of where the people had gone. And there was something else. A ring of stones in the dirt, perfect circle. In the center, a pile of ash. Still faintly warm. Something had been burned there. Recently. Mira turned pale. That smell. It's not wood. We didn't talk after that. We just walked. Fast. Back through the trail, through the switchbacks, trying to beat the sun before it dipped again. But I swear, even as we left the ridge behind, I could hear the faintest sound clinging to the trees. The bells. Just once. We made it back to the ranger station just before sundown, dusty, exhausted, and visibly shaken. Mira didn't say a word the entire walk down, just kept her eyes on the trail, flinching every time the wind moved a branch or a squirrel darted across the underbrush. The ranger on duty was a guy named Aaron, young, maybe in his late 20s, chewing sunflower seeds behind the counter like he'd been doing it all day. I could tell he wasn't expecting anything out of the ordinary when we walked in, looking like we'd seen ghosts. I launched right in, told him everything. The empty camp, the warm food, the bells, the symbols, the footprints, the fire ring. He just blinked at us, not writing anything down, not interrupting, just listening. When I finished, Mira pulled out her phone and showed him the photos she'd managed to take. The tents, the markings, even a blurry shot of the footprints. Aaron frowned. "And you're sure they weren't playing a prank? Just took off to spook you?" I felt my frustration spike. No one cooks chili, pours coffee, and leaves it boiling to go play a prank in the woods. No one leaves barefoot footprints and marks trees with circles and slashes for fun. He stared at the photos again and eventually nodded. "I'll make a note. We'll send a search team up there tomorrow morning. You two should get some rest." It wasn't the reaction I wanted, but what did I expect? That he'd radio in helicopters and shut down the whole mountain? Probably not. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those footprints again. Fresh, circling the tents like someone was watching all night. Mira slept in the other bed in our shared motel room, whispering something in her sleep that I couldn't make out. At one point, she sat bolt upright, eyes open. "They're in the walls," she said. Then she laid back down and went quiet. The search team hiked out the next morning. We asked if we could go with them, but they said no. Protocol. They returned just before sunset. No signs of the other group, no footprints, no fire pit, no symbols on the trees. Even the tents were gone. Mira stared at the rangers like they were lying. I could see it in her eyes. One of them, an older man with a weathered face and a scar running down his cheek, pulled me aside when she wasn't looking. "You saw the signs, didn't you?" he asked. I didn't know what to say. I just nodded. He looked over his shoulder, then leaned in close. "You were lucky. Don't go back there. If they call you again, don't answer." I wanted to ask what he meant. Who would call me? But before I could, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the twilight, like part of the forest swallowed him up. That night, Mira and I drove home in silence. It's been months now. She doesn't talk about it anymore. Changed her number, deleted her social media, moved in with her sister in a different state. Says the dreams stopped after that. But mine didn't. Sometimes, when it's really quiet, I still hear them. The bells. Far away. Like they're just behind the walls. And last week I got a voicemail. No words. Just a low crackling sound. And behind it? Footsteps. Barefoot. In the dirt. They found him barefoot on the side of a forest road, soaked through and blinking against the morning light like he'd never seen the sun. He looked about 40, scruffy, half-starved, with hair to his shoulders and a long, tangled beard. But his ID, faded and pressed into the lining of his jacket, said he was 61, and he'd been declared missing 2 decades ago. I was on shift when the call came through. Possible lost hiker, and it didn't register as anything special. We got plenty of those out here. But the dispatcher's voice had that clipped edge I didn't like. Said the guy didn't know who he was, didn't remember where he'd come from. Said he'd been found just standing there, staring at the treetops like he expected them to speak. When I got to the station, they had him in a blanket, sipping water like it was his first drink in years. I expected him to be delirious, maybe under the influence, but he was quiet, alert. Eyes locked on something behind you when he looked at you, like he was always focused 1 inch past reality. They said his name was Daniel Hill. Missing since August 2004. Last seen hiking in the Black Ridge Woods, a dense stretch of forest 3 counties east. He'd gone off alone, telling his wife he needed time to think. He never came back. There was a full search back then, with dogs, helicopters, volunteers. Nothing. Not a single trace. And now, out of nowhere, here he was. Alive. With not a single memory of anything after the moment he entered the woods. They asked him questions gently, slowly. "Do you know where you are? Do you remember the last thing before you walked into the forest? What's the last year you can remember?" He'd shake his head, every time. There were trees, he'd say, a trail, and then light. Not sunlight, he made that clear. Not sunlight, he said again and again. The light came from inside the trees. Nobody knew what to make of it. The sheriff had that look he gets when something doesn't fit, like when a deer shows up in the middle of the school parking lot and just stands there. You can tell he wanted to believe this was some freak accident, some long-term memory loss paired with survival instincts. But even he didn't say it out loud. The weird thing was, Daniel hadn't aged the way he should have. Sure, his beard was gray and his skin was weathered, but when they ran his vitals, everything was off. His heart rate, his hydration levels, even his dental records. Everything looked like someone who had been lost a week, not 20 years. His shoes were completely deteriorated, but his jacket? Nearly intact. His watch still worked. His wife, Rachel, still lived in the next county. She'd never remarried. I don't know why. Maybe she believed he was still alive. Maybe she couldn't move on. When she arrived at the hospital, they didn't let us in the room. But someone in the hall said she screamed once, loud. And then it was quiet. That night, I went home late, more rattled than I wanted to admit. I fed the dog, microwaved dinner, and tried to push the whole thing out of my head. But something about his eyes wouldn't leave me. I'd looked right at them. I'd seen things. Grief, trauma, shock. But this was different. His eyes weren't empty. They were wrong. Focused, intent, like he knew something, or like something knew him. The next morning, Daniel was gone. The security footage cut out for 13 minutes. He was there, in bed, monitors showing stable vitals. And then he wasn't. No forced entry, no broken windows, nothing on the cameras, except one frame. A still image, time-stamped 2:41 a.m. His bed. Empty. The window wide open, and a smear of dirt across the glass that looked just like a handprint. A hand with too many fingers. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I shut my eyes, I saw his face. Daniel's blank expression, like someone caught mid-dream, stitched right into the center of my brain. The hospital was on lockdown the next morning. News hadn't broken yet, but something was definitely wrong. They weren't saying it was an abduction. They weren't saying anything at all. I showed up early, badge on, but off duty. The nurse on call said Rachel hadn't spoken since Daniel disappeared. Just sat in the waiting room all night, holding his shoes. The official report read like an error log. No witnesses, no security breaches, no signs of trauma or forced exit. The window was open. That was it. A 40-pound adult male had disappeared into thin air again, and no one had an explanation. What really got me? That handprint. They tried to clean it before forensics came, but it had sunk into the glass. I mean that literally. Like the oils or whatever it was had etched themselves into the pane. I saw it with my own eyes. 5 fingers. No, 6. No thumb. Long, twisted ridges like tree bark or cracked leather. One of the deputies joked it was a prank. Maybe he's just hiding in the woods again, he said. But no one laughed. I drove out to Black Ridge that afternoon. I don't know why. Maybe because no one else would. Maybe because I needed to look for myself. The parking lot near trail marker 7 was empty, quiet like the air was holding its breath. I followed the old trail, overgrown now, and counted the steps. I don't know why that mattered, but I counted. The farther I walked, the colder it got. Not the kind of cold that makes your breath fog up. The kind that feels like static in your skin, like something just outside your field of vision is watching and waiting. Then I found the break in the brush, a narrow path that had no business being there. It led down, steep and root-choked, toward the base of a hollow I'd never seen before. The trees bent differently down there, like they were leaning in to listen. And there it was, a clearing. The dirt was dark, almost black, and the center was smooth, like something had rested there, something heavy. A circle of dead grass ringed the spot, and in the middle, one single old leather boot. The other was missing. I didn't touch it. I couldn't. Instead, I took a photo and walked back to the station in a fog. I emailed it to forensics. They couldn't make anything of it. Said the area looked like controlled burn damage, but there were no signs of fire. That night, I dreamed I was standing at the edge of the clearing. There was a light, low to the ground, warm and pulsing like a heartbeat. I heard whispers, no language I knew, just rhythm, repetition. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. When I woke up, there was dirt under my nails, and my boots were muddy. I hadn't left my house. The dreams didn't stop. They changed. grew stronger. I'd see glimpses. Daniel standing in the trees, face blank, eyes all white. Sometimes I'd see Rachel standing by the hospital bed, but everything was upside down and flickering like a projector running out of film. And always the whispering, getting louder, closer. Last week, someone filed a noise complaint from a rural property off Route 17. Said they heard howling in the woods. Said they saw someone standing just beyond the tree line, tall, barefoot, staring at their house for hours. I checked the report myself. The witness described the man as pale, dirty, with a long beard. And, this part froze my blood, his jacket had a torn patch on the shoulder. A patch that said, D Hill. I drove out to the property on Route 17 the next morning. The homeowner, a woman in her 60s named Mrs. Eldridge, met me on the porch with shaking hands. She kept looking over my shoulder while she talked, like she expected something to be standing behind me. Said the man had been watching her home from the woods for hours. Said his mouth never moved, but she could hear him, as if the words were coming from inside her head. He just stood there, she whispered, staring at my bedroom window. It wasn't right. His eyes, they didn't blink. I checked the edge of the woods where she claimed he had stood. No prints, no broken branches, no cigarette butts. But I swear I felt it. The cold from before. That low, buzzing pressure in my bones, like I was too close to a live wire. I returned to the office and pulled Daniel's file. 20 years gone. The night he vanished, he was camping alone. The search lasted months. Hundreds of people combed Black Ridge. No trace. But there was something I never noticed until that moment. The date Daniel vanished? It was exactly 20 years, to the day, from the night he reappeared in the hospital lobby. I don't believe in coincidence. Not anymore. That same night, I got a call from Rachel. First time she'd spoken since Daniel went missing again. Her voice was raspy, like she hadn't used it in years. "He's back," she said. I didn't understand. "What do you mean? When?" "Right now," she whispered. "He's outside, just staring through the window." I slammed the phone down and tore out of the driveway. When I arrived at her house, every light was off except one, her bedroom lamp. The window curtain was parted just enough to see her silhouette inside. But she wasn't alone. A tall shape stood behind her, perfectly still, looming. I rushed the door, but it was locked. By the time I kicked it open, the room was empty. The curtains gently swayed. Rachel was gone. All that remained was a muddy footprint on the hardwood floor, and another handprint, identical to the one at the hospital, stretched across the mirror. 6 fingers, no thumb. This time it wasn't etched. It was wet, fresh. Rachel's phone was on the ground. I picked it up and opened the most recent image. My stomach twisted. It was a photo. Blurry, taken through glass. A reflection of her, and something just behind her. Pale skin stretched over an almost human face. A mouth far too wide. Empty eyes. Familiar jacket. And the words below the photo. "He's been talking to me again." I filed my report. But they locked me out of the case within 24 hours. I was told it had been reassigned. That Rachel had probably left of her own will. That I was too emotionally involved. That's why I'm telling this here. Because I don't think Daniel ever came back from that forest. Not really. I think whatever came back wearing his face was never supposed to leave. If you live near Black Ridge, if you see someone standing still just beyond the trees, watching, don't go outside, don't speak, and whatever you do, don't listen. Not even if they use your name.